Well, welcome everybody to the April meeting of the Durham Region Branch. So here's the agenda for this evening. I'll be doing some announcements and various news items that have come across my desk. Then we'll have Stephen Wood present his Breaking Brick Walls case studies. After that, I will be doing our upcoming branch meetings, giving him some information about them. And at the very end, if time permits, we're going to have open up the chat and enjoy our meeting. So the Durham Region Branch acknowledges the lands and peoples of the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, and a large Métis community. We recognize the lands on which we gather are covered under the Williams Treaties and rest within the traditional territory of the Mississaugas. We honor, recognize, and respect these nations as the traditional stewards of the lands and waters on which we meet. So we're all excited about the announcement about the imminent release of the 1931 Canadian Census on June 1st. And the same partners that helped index the U.S. 1951 Census last year are applying their experience to Canada's 1931 Census. And in one way, I really wish we had the privacy length that the U.S. censuses have. So in this collaboration, LAC has digitized all 234,687 pages. Ancestry is going to process those pages through their advanced handwriting technique, artificial intelligence to create the index. But then Family Search volunteers are going to review and correct the index. So right out of the gate, we can see the images, but we won't have a complete curated index for several months. I believe it was 3 or 4 months down in the States. We're a smaller census, so hopefully it'll be out in a month or two, but we're going to have to see. And the images and the indexes will eventually be available on all 3 sites, Ancestry, Family Search, and the LAC website, Library and Archives Canada. Our next bit of news is the OGS virtual conference. They announced last weekend details for us. So it's September 8th to 10th, and the theme is diversity and genealogy, and it's spotlighting the Grand River area of Ontario. Friday evening, we're going to have a keynote presentation called Settlement Stories from the Grand River from historian Karen Richardson, the museum curator for the Haldimand County Heritage Center. In her talk, she's going to explore how the settlement patterns along the Grand River reflect the cultures and diversity of the people, forming the basis for the shared history. Saturday and Sunday, there's going to be 2 streams of content delivered, one focused on the Grand River stories and the other exploring some of the hidden histories with an eye on diversity. There are going to be 24 sessions in total with 22 different speakers, so it's going to be chock full of education for all of us. So a full list of the speakers and the presentation titles will be found on the conference website, which is right here, conference2023.ogs.on.ca. Now, as a precursor to the conference, on the Friday, they have partnered with Find My Past. So Jennifer Baldwin is going to lead a 5-hour genealogy workshop during the day on Friday, September the 8th. So going through the company's various unique collections. So that will be very interesting as well. And Conference 2024 is going to announce details on May 4th. So that's going to be the first in-person conference in 5 years. And I am so looking forward to that. It's a totally different experience to the virtual conferences, and I can't wait to see all our conference friends again. The OGS webinar for this month is this coming Thursday at 7 p.m. You can sign up on the ogs.on.ca website, and it's about using Google Earth Pro for ancestral mappings. I have seen people demonstrate this. I have not dipped my toe in this pond, so I'm probably going to go and see what it's all about. This is something new I've put in. These are some of our surrounding branches from OGS, or Ontario Ancestors, and it's all about resources here. So York has York County region resources. Quinte has a presentation. You found what, where? And that one is about obscure Ontario sources, opening up new fields to explore in your search for your family history. And then Toronto is looking into the Holocaust resources. On another note, if we have talked about family tree webinars in the past, and they are now also owned by MyHeritage, or supported by MyHeritage. And the last several years, they've had what they call the 24-hour genealogy webinar marathon. It's a week from this coming Thursday, so you need to go to the website at the bottom of the slide, and it's got some of the world's top genealogists and educators. There's stuff about planning research, DNA, ebooks, German calendars, the fan club, friends, associates, and neighbors, or cluster research, Australia, Poland, and Ireland. There's something for everyone in every time zone. And thanks to MyHeritage, the entire event is free. You can pop in for 1 or 2 sessions to catch your fancy, or you can stick around for the full 24 hours. But even if you don't stick around for 24 hours, you can see the recording afterwards. And actually, it's 25 hours, because at the very end on Friday at 5 o'clock, they're going to have a lecture from Elizabeth Schoen Mills, one of the premier genealogy educator. Her class will be called Elusive Ancestors, Never Too Poor to Trace. And that is actually part of a members-only webinar series called The Best of Elizabeth Schoen Mills, Genealogy Problem Solving. All the classes in that series require a webinar membership, but not this particular one. So take advantage of it. It will be really great. Do you have Nova Scotia roots? So we got this announcement from the Genealogical Association of Nova Scotia, and you can find out more information at nsgenconference.ca. So at this point, I'm going to call on Sheila Iacono, our treasurer, to turn on her mic and give her first quarter report that she sent.
Okay, I am here. Thank you, Nancy. So I made the report for all our income and expenses since January 1st until the end of March. So our balance of our current account was $505.91 at the end of last year. And our balance right now is $3,394.18, which is good. It'll help us keep going. The income was the membership fees. So that's really what brought up the balance. And our expenses really haven't changed. They're what they usually are. Our banking fee, $3 a month, some supplies for the office, our HST, our postage, newsletters, printing, our speakers for the meetings, and the rent for the church office. So the total expense is $1348.04. So we'll just hope we continue with the membership fees, keeping us going. So that's it, Nancy.
Thank you very much, Sheila.
You're welcome.
We appreciate that. And I have a slide later on if anyone wishes to make a donation. I'll show you how. Okay, in local news, the Lakeshore Genealogical Society, which is a small group in Coburg, they're having an in-person meeting April the 15th, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. And the participants, it almost sounds like a drop-in. So the participants include the Coburg Library, the Port Hope Library, the Lakeshore Genealogical Society themselves, Northumberland County Archives, Coburg and District Historical Society, the Crammy, I can never know how to pronounce this, Crammy Township History Society, Sifton Cook Heritage Center, or it's also called the Coburg Museum. So if you have any Northumberland County families, this might be someplace you want. And there is a small Uxbridge genealogical group in Uxbridge here in Durham region. They meet April the 20th, a Thursday night at the Uxbridge Public Library. And their topic this month is also brick walls, but they are actually working on members' problems and asking the other members to make suggestions, or you can become a member for $25 a year, but only members get the Zoom link to participate because it is a hybrid meeting. And here we go for our main presentation. No idea on how to get past your brick wall? Need help cracking the case? Let's watch Stephen Wood, our research coordinator, show how he has helped many people work on their brick walls. Stephen Wood is one of the founding members of the Durham Region Branch. He has held many roles in our branch since 1982. He is the past chair and the current researcher and office manager from the branch. His wife, Lori, is our librarian. Now, Stephen and his wife, Lori, have built our library catalog, which I'm holding back at this point because we're seeing, we've got a volunteer who's giving our website a bit of an update. So I'll wait for that to finish, and then I will ask the IT people at Ontario Ancestors to put up our library catalog. Now, at our, if you were here in December, our 40th anniversary celebration, we presented Steve and Lori with a plaque renaming our library to the Stephen and Lori Wood Library in honor of their dedication to the Durham Region Branch. And our branch was originally known as Whitby Oshawa Branch. So if you have publications under that name, that was our precursor. Steve has offered to pause after each case study to allow for questions. I would ask you to please type your questions into the chat, but keep them short and generalized to this topic. We're not going to discuss people's particular problems. So at this point, I'll stop my sharing and let Steve start his and turn on his microphone.
Now, hopefully you've got it.
Perfect. Go ahead, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Nancy, and welcome everyone. Nancy has introduced me, and I can't top that, so we'll just get started here. We do get a number of queries coming in throughout the year, and then we also put requests out for our brick walls, and we got a few in this year, not a lot, but I was able to spend more time on them because there was fewer entries. So the first one's entitled The Thompson Family. And I subtitled all these. So this one's called The Smallest Clue. The Thompson family came from Clark Township. Thomas Thompson was born in 1829 in Yorkshire, England, and died in 1917 in Minnesota. According to several records that they have, one of them is a 1905 county mug book from Minnesota, and they state that his parents were Thomas R. Thompson and Anne Green. They emigrated to Ontario in 1831 from Yorkshire with their son Thomas, who was 2 years old at the time. Thomas Jr. married Fanny Moulton about 1855 in Canada, and they resided in Orono, Clark Township, for some time before traveling to Minnesota via covered wagon in 1856. As I say, this is reasonably well documented in more than one source. So, first thing, obviously, we look for the family in the census of Clark Township for either Thomas R. Thompson and his wife Anne, or even just Anne if he was dead by that time, or Thomas Jr. Now, the Clark Township for 1851 is incomplete. Only about I believe it's about a third of it survives. And we could not find a Thomas Sr., Anne, or Thomas Jr. Thomas Jr. first appears in 1857 in Minnesota, and he's married to Fanny by that time, Fanny Moulton. We did not locate a marriage record in Ontario for Thomas Jr. and Fanny, but Fanny was found in the 1851 Clark Township census and was a member of the Christian Church. That should have been a little clue for us to find the marriage record. But nothing else was found for Thomas Jr. until Minnesota. I had actually done a lot of work on him. We could not find him in land records because they weren't here, or at least Thomas was not here as an adult for very long and did not seem to leave a trail in land records or in census, the few census records we had. The only clue I did eventually come across was from a Newcastle newspaper index, which is on microfiche. And it read, Mrs. Thomas Thompson, née Fanny Moulton, formerly of Clark, died in Minnesota. And the newspaper was dated 1892, February 17th. Well, I decided to look this up, mostly just to forward on every little scrap and clue I could. I figured this was more for the Moulton side of the family, which I was also checking out for the researcher, but I looked it up because they're online, and at first I could not find it. The OCR must be pretty bad for that particular edition, because I couldn't even get it to come up under Moulton, Thompson, Fanny, nothing. The only way I finally got the newspaper to come up was by putting in the date of the newspaper and then going through it page by page. However, this little clue turned out to be a little bit better than we thought. So it was in the Orono column, and you can, at the bottom of the page there is the location for the Clarington newspapers. And it states, Mr. and Mrs. Robert Winter has just received news from Minnesota of the death of Fanny Moulton, late wife of Mr. Thomas Thompson, formerly residents of Clark. Well, I was working on the Moultons, but I hadn't run into any Winters yet. So the next thing to do was, of course, to check out the Winters. I first found them in the Clark Township Census records, which was very fortunate. It gave me their ages. I went looking for marriage records, and I did find the marriage record of Sarah Ann Thompson to Robert Winters in 1882. Now, Sarah Ann Thompson, she listed her parents as Ann Thompson and Richardson Thompson. And as it turns out, her death registration also states the same parents. So that was consistent. I was overjoyed because this was a Thompson connection, not a Moulton connection by the looks of it. Excuse me. So back to the Clark Township Census. No luck in 1851, but in the 1861 Clark Township, we did come across Richardson Thompson. I don't know if you can see my cursor there or not, but Richardson Thompson, born in England, age 65. Presumably his son Robert, age 26, born Upper Canada. Mrs. Ann Thompson, born England, age 65. Sarah Ann Thompson, born Upper Canada, age 23, presumably another daughter. And then Mary Jean Thompson, I do not remember her connection, but she's age 11. She would not be a daughter because she's too young, and Miss Ann would be too old to have given birth to her. So the Richardson family did turn up in Clark Township. I was able to find Richardson in the 1861 Tremaines Atlas, and using that lot and concession number, I was actually able to pull up a will for him as well, because it was attached to the land records. So my next step was to just took a flyer kind of and checked, because Richardson Thompson is an uncommon name, whereas the Thompson name itself is very popular, too popular. But there was a Richardson Thompson marrying in 1817 in Lockton, Yorkshire, England, which is where Thomas Thompson was supposed to be from, to an Anne Green. Well, Anne Green, of course, was the mother's name, or at least said to be the mother's name, of the Thomas Thompson Jr. So this looked very promising. This is probably a bishop's transcript of the actual marriage register. You can see that Richardson Thompson of Brompton and Anne Green of Lockton in the parish of Middleton were married by banns on the 25th of December, 1817. And Richardson could sign his name, although this is a copy, not his handwriting, but Anne only made her mark. I was also able to find records for all of the children there that appeared to be children for Richardson and Anne. Elizabeth, baptized 1819. Now he's just called Richard in that one, but of Richard and Anne. Hannah, 1821, daughter of Richard and Anne. Richard, 1823, son of Richardson and Anne. William, 1826. Thomas, the guy we're looking for, the time is right, the date is right, son of Richardson and Anne Thompson. And then from the census, we pulled up a Robert, born about 1835 in Upper Canada. And then Sarah Ann, who was also in the census and marriage and death records, born Clark Township, 1837. And luckily enough, when I did find the will, every single one of those children were mentioned in the will. He wrote his will in 1862, and there was a codicil written in January 1863, and they were both registered in 1865. So he obviously died sometime between the 63 and 65 dates. We do not have an actual date of death for Richardson Thompson. Okay, more supporting information just to help lock this in. When Mother Ann Thompson died in 1881 in Clark Township, her death registration stated she was born in Yorkshire, England. Elizabeth Thompson, the eldest daughter, married Hiram Lake about 1838 in Upper Canada, and they ended up in Winnebago County, Illinois. In 1870, Richardson Thompson Jr. was enumerated with this family. Luckily, someone added a couple of obituaries to find my grave entries for the Thompsons, and Richard Thompson's obituary, he died in 1900, mentions a niece, Sarah Gleesman, his brother, William Thompson of Rockford, Illinois. I think it's in Winnebago County as well, and Mrs. Hiram Lake, which of course was Elizabeth Thompson. We did find out a bit more about William Thompson. He married in 1852 in the Newcastle district to Elizabeth Davis, and they resided in Bowmanville until about 1878. Eventually, they ended up in Winnebago County, Illinois, and he was enumerated with his great-nephew's family in the county of Winnebago. He moved over to Rockton, Winnebago County before 1900, and he died in 1912 in Rockton. Oddly enough, his widow eventually returned to Bowmanville via Florida, if you believe it, and died there in 1928 at the age of 95 years. What was really nice, he apparently was the mayor of Bowmanville from about 1876 to 1878, and a book had a little picture of him in it, so I've included that. A nice little extra to come across. And daughters Hannah Thompson and Sarah Ann Thompson both ended up marrying Robert Winter, or Winters, take your pick. Hannah married him first and passed away, and then Sarah Ann married him, I believe it was 1880s. So, and as I stated before, Sarah Ann's marriage and death registrations both identify her parents as Richardson and Ann Thompson. Did not find any more out about Robert Thompson after the 1861 census and his mention in Richardson's 1863 will. So he is the one loose end that we ended up with. However, my conclusions that Richardson and Anne Green Thompson were from Yorkshire, had the son Thomas about October 1829, the same month and year as our subject Thomas, and had similar names to the 1905 County Atlas information, especially if the R in Thomas R. Thompson stood for Richardson. Richardson's will confirmed all the known children's names, so they all survived to adulthood. Richardson and Ann resided in Clark Township, where Thomas Thompson's wife also resided. That would be Fanny Moulton. And probably Thomas was there as well, just in one of the missing sections. And as I noted, we did find connections between several of the Thompson siblings in newspaper and census returns. So we were able to lock most of the family together very nicely. So we have concluded we do have the right family from Yorkshire, England. And I'm saying that that brick wall just came down. Okay, our second case is to find the maiden name of Lucinda, wife of James DeLong. This is where
just a minute, Steve.
Sure. Oh, right. Yeah, I'm going too fast. Yeah. Sorry.
Well, I haven't got any questions in the chat yet, but I have two comments on that case.
Okay.
The first one is Cher Latouze, and she said the local Christian church was located near Tricky's Corners, just north of Newcastle Village or just south of Orono. So that's good to know.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and maybe Cher knows if it's in the United Church Archives or not. And then I've got a comment from Wanda Sinclair. And she says, I'm a descendant of Calvin Moulton, 1771 to 1844, through his daughter, Felina Hayward, née Moulton, 1795 to 1880. So did we ever find out Fanny's father's name?
Oh, yes, I have them back to the 1600s. So
Wow.
Calvin is the grandfather. I think believe it's Fanny's grandfather. I can't remember Fanny's father's name, but it's not James or William or anything. It's a little bit different, and I can't think of his name.
Okay.
I do have that, and I can always put her in touch with the other lady if she'd like, or forward her name on to the other lady if she wants to be in touch.
Okay. And Cher has noted that the Christian Church may have records at the Ontario Archives.
Okay. I kind of expected that the Newcastle District Marriage Register might have the marriage in it, because that was the different congregations that actually had to send in their records. So, but it wasn't in there. But perhaps they married in the Anglican Church, which is the one of the major churches we don't have our hands on.
That's right. And then Bob Bell said, I'm a descendant of Alex Thompson and Esther. Alex lived 1822 to 1891. None of the names you mentioned seem to connect to mine, though, although they lived in Clark Township. So, maybe there is a connection further back.
It could be. If you can trace it back to Yorkshire, there's a chance they may have, a group of them could have come over. Yeah.
That's true.
Interesting.
Thompson is a very common name.
That's the big problem. I meant to mention that at the start. It wasn't the lack of finding Thompsons. It was the lack of finding Thomas Thompsons.
Yes.
There was too many Thompsons otherwise.
Yes. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we're on to the maiden name of Lucinda, and I've called this one Helpful Hints. Lucinda was the wife of James DeLong. She does not appear in any records except entered as the name of the mother. Early census records have her born between about 1811 and 1820. Her first known child, Reuben, was born about 1838 in Rochester, New York, but there's likely a sister born before him, and likely in New York as well. They had a total of 3 sons and 3 daughters per the early census returns, and she died between about 1848, after daughter Caroline was born, and 1858, when James remarried to widow Mary Folsom Clark. There are some trees on the internet that list her last name as Clark or Lecrae, because her son Reuben DeLong's marriage record is so screwed up that nobody can read it properly. However, we probably know 4 of her 6 children. Reuben, as we mentioned before, was born about 1838 in Rochester, New York. He died in the 1860s. His marriage record states his mother's name as Lorinda, which I suspect somebody wrote down, meaning to write down Lucinda. And he was of Clark Township and Sanilac County, Michigan. There's a John DeLong, born about 1840 in Upper Canada. He was residing with his brother, or proposed brother, Reuben, in the 1861 census. That was the only connection we had, but it was a logical one. William was born about 1844 in Canada West. His marriage record states his mother's name as Lucinda. Unfortunately, his death registration only lists his father James's name, and he stayed and remained in Clark Township. Caroline, she was born about 1848 in Canada West, married in 1869 in Saginaw County, Michigan, to Matthew Connors. He passed away, and she married secondly about 1877, either in Michigan or Pennsylvania, to Byron D. Tome. This connection has been more or less confirmed by autosomal DNA matches. So that was a little helpful extra there. Problems. Couldn't find a death record for Reuben in Michigan, and it probably wouldn't have been any use anyways, because his parents' names probably wouldn't be on it because he died too early. We could not find a second marriage record for Caroline in Michigan or Pennsylvania. That would have been helpful because it was much later. We could not find a death record for daughter Caroline, who supposedly died the 3rd of May, 1928, likely in Corydon, McKean County, Pennsylvania, according to trees at Ancestry. And I do know where they got that information. She was living there in the 1920 census. The witnesses to the marriage of Reuben and William DeLong were not helpful, as they couldn't be positively identified in Ontario census or vital statistics. And one of the other problems that's not on here is we figure that James probably went back to New York State sometime, met his wife down in New York State, married her, had a couple of kids there, and then came back to Ontario. So the fan set up, friends, associates, family, neighbors, it's not quite as useful because the wife probably did not have relatives up here. It's just a theory, but it kind of seems to be that way. We could link James to several locations in Clark Township in early census and assessment records, but he didn't own any of the land. He doesn't appear in the abstract index book. As far as we can tell, James did not own any land in Canada West. Even checked the township papers, although I think I missed a couple because I found a couple new locations afterwards and never did it. The Upper Canada Land Petitions Index was checked. Local available church records were checked. We do not have access to the Anglican ones, or at least at our office or anything like that. Okay, so what did I do? I built a tree at Ancestry for James and Lucinda DeLong. It wasn't one of those quick and dirty ones they talk about. This one was slow and rather painful because it took a long time. I linked everything I could to them. But by doing that, you do get a hints tab with various hints, and it offers up 3 Ancestry member trees. And you can take a look at these trees and see what they have. And one of the trees actually listed Caroline's parents as James DeLong and Lucinda Van Tassel. So I contacted the owner of the tree and asked where she got the information about Caroline's parents from, and they graciously responded. It came from a book, Pennsylvania's Pine Creek Valley and Pioneer Families. It's a huge book, but on pages 1187 and 1188, it does have the Byron D. Tome family. And she did send me a copy of that page, which was very nice of her. Unfortunately, the book is kind of unreliable. It had Carrie born in 1855. She was actually born about 1844. It had her marrying Byron in 1864. They actually married about 1877. And if you do a little bit of math, if she was really born in 1855 and married in 1864, she was the ripe old age of 9 years. So you just can't take that book as the gospel truth. So Van Tassel is a clue, but you can't really rely on it. But we weren't finished. I tried to find son John DeLong, born about 1840, Canada West, in census and other records on Ancestry and Family Search. Those are my 2 primary sources for all these records tonight. And after looking through a lot of possibilities and discarding most of them, I came across a John DeLong, born about 1840 in Canada, but residing in South Valley, Cattaraugus County, New York. He supposedly arrived in the U.S. in 1866 and married a Christina F., who was also known as Stancia, Chrysanthemum, etc., about 1869. Now, Caroline DeLong also stated she emigrated to the U.S. in 1866 in her 1910 census return. They had 3 sons, James Reuben, Now, John's father was James. John's grandfather was Reuben. That's one of the reasons I kept following up on this guy. Then they had William and George Washington. So, more records for John DeLong. According to the census records, he was naturalized, and records at Family Search showed his declaration of intention dated the 5th of October, 1882, and a naturalization date of the 13th of September, 1888. And while there's not a lot of information here, I don't know if there's any other records to do with naturalization that might have more information or not, but at least you get a nice signature for him. So if you were trying to follow him down through other records, you'd have something to go with. I also searched the grantor and grantee indexes and deeds for Cattaraugus County, and we discovered that John had purchased part of Lot 11, Town 1, Range 9 of the Holland Company survey, comprising 25 acres, in South Valley, Cattaraugus County, on the 3rd of August, 1875. Unfortunately, this land was subsequently sold out from underneath it by the sheriff on the 27th of March, 1885. Pardon me. However, John's residence at the time of purchase was very interesting. It's hard to read, but this indenture made this 3rd day of August, 1875, between James A. Brown and Emma, his wife, of the town of Corydon, County of McKean, State of Pennsylvania, of the first part, and John N. DeLong of the same town, county, and state. Well, Corydon was where his sister Caroline was living. Now, time-wise, this is actually before she supposedly married Byron D. Tome. So I think that widow Caroline went with her brother John to Pennsylvania and probably met Byron there at that time. I did try to follow up on James and Emma Brown. I did get her maiden name. They do not seem to have any connection to either the Moultons or the Moultons Thompson. I'm in the wrong thing, aren't I? Into the DeLongs, sorry. I got too many names in my head here. So, okay, that kind of connects up this John to Caroline. So puts them in the same location, adding to the weight that to my theory that John was another child of James and Lucinda DeLong. So once I got him all set up with all the links I could, I did a check of the ancestor memory trees under the hints tab at Ancestry. And a couple of trees called John Nelson Van Tassel DeLong, and his wife, Christina Frederica Helgeson. I did send out messages to hopefully track down the source of this name for John, but so far I've received no helpful replies as of yet. The one person that did answer had just copied it off of another tree. But that's 2 Van Tassels. That's looking a little more promising. So, in conclusion, I think Lucinda, wife of James DeLong, may have been born Lucinda Van Tassel, but we need more proof. Now, one way to get that proof, the New York U.S. Death Index at Ancestry listed John DeLong, who died the 5th of December, 1912, in South Valley, New York. South Valley is where our John lived. Now, some trees have a different date and location for John's death, but I don't know whether they just didn't see this one or what, or whether this will turn out to be somebody else. But if you obtain death certificate number 54714, it just might confirm John's parents and hopefully give his mother's maiden name. For fun, I took a look, and there's 26 Van Tassel families enumerated in the 1820 New York census, with a daughter either under the age of 10 or aged 11 to 15. So if somebody wants to do a lot of checking of a few of other Van Tassel trees, they might be able to come up with something. There does not appear to be any Lucinda Van Tassels floating in family trees that might be the one we're looking for, though. So unfortunately, we can't cheat and do it. We're going to have to do all the work if somebody wants to prove the Van Tassel. So I think while we haven't really proven it, there is light at the end of the tunnel on this one. Okay, Nancy, I remembered to stop this time.
Okay. So, Bob Bell added a comment that he thought his Thompsons from the last case were Irish.
Irish, okay, so
Okay.
probably a
Yes.
different setup then.
So Cher is saying, I have some Anglican church records at the Newcastle Historical Society for this
Okay.
case.
Interesting.
Interesting. And DeLong says, thanks, Steve, for all of this work and for leaving me with a follow-up project.
Yes. And if anybody's interested in that particular DeLong family, Ann and Dan are members of the branch, and you can contact them through the branch.
Okay. And Cher is also saying there are many town records at New York State University, and you might want to look there for Van Tassen's. So there you go, Ann. You can add that to your project.
Yeah, Steve's retired from this one. 26 families was enough to count. Oh, perfect then. Okay. Okay, and I see you're muted, so I guess we're on to the next one then. Okay, the unknown parentage of Mary Jane Parsons. I've called this one The Afterthought. She was born about 1833 to 36 in England, married George A. Downey in 1852, around that time, because the first daughter was born about 1854. They lived in Darlington Township in 1861, Pickering Township in 1871, and Bowmanville in 1881. After George died, Mary Jane ended up in Rochester, New York, and she died there in 1892, but was brought home to the Bowmanville Cemetery, and there's a beautiful obituary for her in the Newcastle Newspaper Index. They had 6 children: Mary Ann, William George, Alonzo John, Alice, Robert, David, and Maud. Now, there were some candidates for Mary Jane's parents. There was an Arthur Parsons and Elizabeth Brent, his wife, living in Hope Township. Arthur died in 1870. They had married in England in East Putford, Devonshire, on the 31st of October, 1830. There was a William Parsons and Jane Wilcox. They married in Darlington Township in December 1845, which of course is about 9 years or 10 years after Mary Jane was born. However, they did live close to the Downeys for many years, and they were worth keeping an eye on as well. There was also a William Parsons and Margaret Trick of Hope Township, Durham County. William died in 1887. Now, I have to give credit to the researcher, David, because he did all the work on this one. I did not. I just sent him a couple of clues, okay? So David did all the legwork on this one. It's all his baby. So William Parsons and Margaret Trick was ruled out thanks to probate records uncovered by David. That's him at the bottom of the page there, 1887. And Arthur's and his wife Elizabeth's wills were, I found the entries in the index books and passed them along. And the other William, he died in Exeter, Huron County in 1891. And there was a will left for him as well. So I did leave some follow-up suggestions in the surrogate court index books to go after the actual records to see if it listed all the children. Unfortunately, the various probate records did not provide any direct information on Mary Jane Parsons Downey. David figured, looking forward, getting a copy of her death certificate from New York was the best option to finding her parents. Now, I did a little more work. If Mary Jane Parsons was of Darlington Township when she wed, then there appears to have only been one Parsons family residing in Darlington Township per the early assessment records. I looked in the records 1840 to 1849, and only a William Parsons appeared in them, often residing on Concession 2, Lot 12. Using that information, a check of the land records at familysearch.org indicated that this William Parsons was a Bowmanville, a plasterer by trade, and had a wife, Eliza, in 1856. However, they moved. In 1861, they're living in St. Mary's, Perth County, and have a 19-year-old named Eliza Parsons with them. In 1871, William and Eliza Parsons are in Sarnia, Lambton County. He's a stucco-man by trade, and Eliza was born in Ireland. Well, both of them were born in Ireland. Now, this William Charles Parsons died 24th of March, 1877 in Strathroy, Middlesex County, Ontario, at the age of 75. He really moved around. He was still listed as a plasterer, and the informant was John Henry Pike, a fellow plasterer of Strathroy. I did figure out who J.H. Pike married, and so I could not see any connection that way to the Parsons family. However, as Nancy has mentioned, my wife and I were working on a searchable list of our entire library collection. And just after researching a lot of this, we happened to be working on the P's. I was the gopher, taking books to my wife to enter, and then taking the ones that were done back to file on the shelf in alphabetical order. Turns out the branch owns a copy of The History of William and Jane Wilcox Parsons Family, which was written in 1985 by Marion Elizabeth Orchard Parsons, and whose husband was a descendant of the couple. The book actually has very little detail on the two progenitors, but family lore indicated they thought that Jane Wilcox was actually a second wife of William Parsons. The book also mentioned that William and Jane were interred in the Exeter Cemetery, and beside their graves was the monument of William's sister, Susanna Parsons, and her husband, Edmund W. Whiting. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. So I passed this information along in case they turned out to be David's relatives. Well, David got back to me after a short while, and here's what he had to say. I found evidence that the family lore in the Parsons book that Jane Wilcox was thought to be a second wife of William Parsons is correct. This, and also knowing that William had a sister, Susanna Parsons, married to Edmund Whiting, were key in making the connection to Cornwall, England. I found the first marriage and the birth of a daughter named Mary Jane Parsons in 1834. The marriage was also in 1834, and it appears that the mother died from complications of childbirth. So he sent these entries. I imagine that means find my past. Cornwall marriages, North Petherwin Parish. Petherwin. William Parsons married Mary Ann Pearden, 6th of May, 1834. Mary Jane Spry Parsons was baptized 29th of November, 1834, daughter of William and Mary Ann Parsons. And then the mother, Mary Ann Parsons, buried in North Petherwin Parish on the 3rd of December, 1834, aged 20 years. So she only lasted about 4 days or 5 days after the baptism of her daughter. But it was interesting. You can note I've highlighted the Spry middle name because we didn't have that before. The family was found in the 1841 census of England in St. Teith, Cornwall. Near the bottom there is William Parsons, age 25. And there's Mary Jane Spry Parsons, age 6. And to make things a little nicer, he's living with potential parents, William and Alice Parsons. So this all is linking it all together. And then David did send me another update. He was in touch with the Anglican Church Archive, which had a record of their marriage on the 6th of January, 1853 in St. George's Church, Newcastle. And the eldest 4 children were baptized on November 23rd, 1863 in St. John Church, Blackstock, in the parish of Cartwright. The Parsons were living in Darlington Township on Concession 10, Lot 2 at the time. And the parents are listed as George and Mary Jane Spry Downey. There's that Spry again. David writes that he believes he could have found the Parsons family in England just knowing that her name was Mary Jane Spry Parsons. But it is more confirmation that this is the correct family. So everything fits together really nicely. And my conclusion, find the parents of Mary Jane Parsons? Check.
Well, I have one comment in the chat. Audrey Dodge says, I'm a descendant of Mary Jane Parsons Downey and have a DNA connection to William Parsons and Jane Wilcox descendants. So
Okay.
more confirmation.
More confirmation. Excellent. Yeah.
Yeah.
So whether or not, I mean, those other Parsons, or at least one of the other Parsons, I think maybe 2 of them were from Devonshire, Cornwall area. So it's quite possibly going a little further back. Many of them may eventually connect up too. You never know.
And
I
yes,
haven't looked on a map or anything to see where the different locations are, so I don't know how close they are to each other, but
yeah. So Edward has added the Whitings of Exeter pronounce it as Whiting.
waiting. Okay. I honestly had no clue. It could go either way.
Yeah. I would expect a double T if it was Whitting, but you never know with English, do you?
You never know. You should see how badly I'm going to mash this, one of the next names up.
Okay.
Irish.
I'll go back. Yeah, okay, you're on to your next case then.
Okay, thank you. Okay, here we go. The search for Thomas Carter's parents. And subtitled, Check Multiple Sources. The outline for Thomas Carter. He was born about 1829 in Yorkshire, England, per census records, his second marriage registration, and his death registration. His father was entered as William on his first marriage record, and his parents were listed as William and Mary on his second marriage record. His third marriage record indicates that William and Ann Carter were his parents. So a little bit of wrong, but certainly William for the father and either Mary or Mary Ann perhaps for the mother, maybe. Thomas Carter of Kirby Grindelith Parish and Jane Hood of Ulrome Parish had their banns published on the 7th, 14th, and 21st of March, 1852 in Kirby Grindelith Parish, Yorkshire. This is the 1829 Thomas Carter. Jane Hood, a servant, was born about 1831 in Burton Agnes Parish, Yorkshire, was listed in the 1851 census of Kirby Grindelith. And because they were married in March 1852, and Thomas was supposedly of Kirby Grindelith, we kind of figured that's where he should be as well. But we could not spot him there in Kirby Grindelith in the 1851 census, and nor in any other obvious census entry for that year. No baptismal records with those parents' names were located in Yorkshire either. So after going through all the usual basic records, I set up a chart. I copied out every Thomas Carter born in Yorkshire between 1827 and 1831, because 1829 was a very consistent year of birth through all the census records in Ontario for Thomas, plus his death record. Everything said 1829 or 1828. So what I did, Thomas in green is the person I'm looking for. Thomas, down the rest of the page is all the other ones I found. First, I did baptisms, and then I would put the location and the parents' names. If I found them in the 1841 census and was sure it was them, then I would enter that. Here I am pointing at the page. That's not helping, is it? And then 1851 census, if I knew it was him, I would add it there. And if I had him in 1861, he got added here. Now, anybody that made it through to 1861 obviously wasn't the Thomas Carter in Canada in 1861. So they got turned red, as in stop, don't bother with this line. So you can see I started to go through parish registers first, 1841 census, 1851 census, 1861 census, and it wasn't too bad. I forget, I think I have about 45 or 46 lines or something like that of different names, some of which are matched up like you see here, some of which I was partially through and not finished with. Well, so pardon me. After I extracted all the obvious ones from Yorkshire at Ancestry and matched up the obvious ones, I wanted to double check them against the entries at FamilySearch.org because I didn't seem to have enough baptisms for starters. So I thought I'd better double check and see if I was missing any. And I went through, and the majority of the entries were duplicates, with one important exception. They had a Thomas Carter, born about 1829 in Ruston, residing in the township of Kirby Grindelith in the 1851 census. And I'd looked pretty hard, and as had the researcher, and we hadn't spotted it via at least Ancestry. And I tend to even drop off the last surname if I have an idea what I'm looking for. Didn't find him. So I wondered why he didn't appear in the Ancestry Index, and he was there as Thomas Coates. You can see that, yes, I can see exactly where they got Coates from, although the ER at the end is the same as Thomas Fisher, 2 names down. So that I should have been a little suspect to whoever was indexing it, but I can't totally fault them because it definitely doesn't really look like Carter either. Luckily, somebody at Family Search was on the ball and caught it. So that gave us our potential Thomas Carter. Now, Ruston and Wickham, you can see on the map, are next to each other there. Oddly enough, just down in towards the lower left side is Brompton, which came up in our first example of the day. So we got 3 right from the same area of Yorkshire. But Thomas Carter, who was supposedly born in Ruston in the 1851 census, turns out to be baptized in Wickham Parish, in the parish register, which I believe is a bishop's transcript, in 1829, Thomas, son to Ann Carter of Ruston. So there's our Ruston confirmation that it's probably the same person from the 51 census. And we figure Thomas Carter was born to Ann Carter about 1829 in Ruston, Yorkshire. Ann Carter, about 1806 to 1845, was likely the daughter of William Carter and Mary Simpson and was baptized in Brompton Parish in 1806. She probably wed Henry Peasgood in Wickham in 1832. Now, why did Thomas say his parents were William and Mary? Well, did he use his grandparents' names as his parents' names on his marriage records? Was he raised by them? In 1841, at the ripe old age of 11, he was out working as an agricultural laborer. By coincidence, the parents' names of Thomas's first wife were also William and Mary, so he was definitely surrounded by William and Marys. This conclusion was exactly the same as Janice came up with when she did this work, but she could not prove it to her satisfaction, and that's why we tried it again from a whole new perspective. As far as we're concerned, we have punched a hole in that brick wall.
Very interesting, Steve. I actually don't have any comments in the chat at this point. So we'll move on to your next case.
Our next case. Okay, here we go. Oh, the unknown parentage of John G. Brown. I like to refer to him, and I believe Nancy does as well, as it's her ancestor, as an alien from another planet. This is one of the cases where we've tried to use DNA to either prove or disprove some of the things about John Brown. Now, the known facts are what he wanted us to know anyways. He was born about 1855 or 56 in Montreal, Quebec, per his marriage record and census returns. However, we did not spot him in any of the Quebec records that are available on Ancestry. Lots of Browns there, not one that fits the bill. He married on the 16th of January, 1878 in Glencoe, Middlesex County, Ontario, to Elizabeth Collier. The witnesses were Colliers, so they were not useful for the fan club. John's residence was listed as Elvinston, Brooke Township, Lambton County, Ontario. And at the same time, he was said to be a farmer, and his religion was Episcopalian. By 1881, the couple were living in Brooke, Lambton County, and he was a mill hand. In 1891, the family was living in Bothwell, Zone Township, Kent County, and he was an iron molder. His daughter, Helen Pearl Brown's 1909 marriage record states that her father was a stove molder, but we have no record for John found after the 1891 census return. More clues. This had, like I say, we exhausted census returns, church records, what little were available, etc., etc. But we did have Nancy's autosomal DNA to use as well. Now, her autosomal DNA results of her and both another cousin list Collier relatives, which was John Brown's wife, but there's nothing obvious under the Brown surname. When we examined paternal side autosomal records at Ancestry, we found that there were several people with the Bush surname and the Ackley surname. Later research determined that the Ackleys were actually descendants of the Bush family. We also discovered several Conley family descendants that also matched the John Brown descendants, and one branch of the Bush family had shared matches with both the Bush and the Conley autosomal shared DNA matches. There is a little caveat here. The minimum 20 centimorgan limit at Ancestry does prevent us from spotting smaller ones unless we knew who to look for in the first place. So there could be other, we'll say, Bush Conley shared matches at levels lower than 20 centimorgans, but we have not spotted them yet. But definitely the one branch of the Bush family did match the Conleys, as well as supposedly the Browns. This is a quick chart of the Brown family. At the very top is John Brown and Elizabeth, the reputed parents of John Brown, born 1855, Quebec, and who married Elizabeth Collier. We have autosomal DNA from at least 3 of the children, and at least 1 or at least 2 of these children definitely have the Bush and Conley matches as well. 3rd one we're still working on. So back to building a quick and dirty family tree for the bush line. It's actually a little more solid than a quick and dirty tree, but it started out as a quick and dirty tree. And eventually we found that all these bushes led back to a Johann Michael Busch, born about 1819 in Württemberg, Germany, and his wife, Catherine, said to be Bach, but I haven't proven that yet, born about 1834 in Bavaria. They lived in Buffalo, Erie County, New York, and descendants of 3 of their children have autosomal matches with Nancy. We also constructed a tree for the Connolly family, and it turned out to be that Arthur Connolly, born about 1796 in Ireland, and his wife, Shubaya, also known as Shibi, Sylvia, and Sarah, Clark, was her surname, and she was born about 1793 in Ireland. They resided in Lockport, Niagara County, New York. Descendants of 2 of their children have autosomal matches with Nancy. 3 of their 7 children have not been found at this time. I do know there were 7 children. We only know of 4 of them. There are a couple of coincidences to mention. Descendants of John Busch, born about 1855 in Erie County, New York, who would be a contemporary of John Brown, born about 1855 in supposedly Montreal. This John was the son of John Michael Busch and Catherine Bach. They are the ones that match the Connolly descendants, as well as matching the Brown descendants. John's occupation in the census returns was a molder, same as John Brown in later years. He's found in the Buffalo census returns 1855 to 1905 with his wife Christina Chris and their 4 children after they wed in 1885. But John is there with his parents earlier than that. Kind of figured that it probably was not John Brown with 2 families due to the distance involved. But the 1875 Buffalo census shows John in Canada. The column that I have the red arrow pointing to, where it says Canada, says usual place of employment if out of the city or town where the family resides. Well, that's John Brown, 1855. Works out nicely. He's age 20 and 75. And he's working in Canada. Okay, that just opened a little door there. You notice there's quite a few kids to the family. And there was more after 1875 as well. This is a bit of a snapshot of the Busch family, although I'm missing the right-hand side of the page, which has about 3 more kids, including 1 DNA matched descendant. But you can see we've got 3 lines of Henry J. Busch coming down with descendants. We've got at least 2 lines from John W. Busch and Christina Chris coming down with descendants. And the John W. Busch, Christina Chris descendants, they are much higher in centimorgan size than the rest of them. We're talking maybe 30 to 50 range of centimorgans for Henry's and Philip's descendants, whereas John Busch's descendants, they're hundreds for some of them. In fact, one of them is 323 centimorgans, which is crazy. It's way too high, which we're not arguing, but there's definitely some sort of either irregularity or something there, but that's how it works out. It's definitely a nice number on John W. Busch's descendants to match up with Nancy. Okay, another coincidence. There was a John Connolly, born about 1855 in Niagara County, New York. He was the son of John Connolly and Elizabeth Grimes, and they lived in Lockport, Niagara County, New York. And you can find John Jr. there from 1860 to 1900. He was a painter and cabinet finisher by trade, and he never married. Again, figured he probably wasn't the John Brown of Ontario due to the distance involved. There's a brief outline of the Conley family. They start a little earlier. They got an extra generation in there, but you can see John Conley and then his son John. I don't have DNA matches from that line, but we do have DNA matches from Sarah Conley and from James Conley. Arthur Conley, don't really have much on him as well. I did find the will for Arthur Conley, and it only mentions John, Sarah, and James as his children. So whether the other four had passed by then, I don't know. But there were supposedly a total of 7 children in the family, according to the 1865 Buffalo census. But you can see we had some fun, and we had lots of matches. The number of matches was not hurting anything at all, except we had a little challenge. We could not fit and connect up the Bush from Germany and the Conley from Ireland within a short, limited time frame to have an 1855 child in New York. And that's even if that's the scenario. Now, Buffalo and Lockport are only about 29 miles apart, so the distance isn't a huge factor. But we just could not connect up a Bush and a Conley, at least not in time to have a son born in 1855. The shared centimorgan tool at DNApainter.com indicates that Nancy should be a half-third cousin, twice removed to most of the Conley shared matches, even though there's 2 different generations represented. That would mean that Arthur Conley, born in 1796, would have to be John Brown's father. His wife, Shabaya, would be too old to have a child by that time. The shared centimorgan tool indicates that Nancy should be about a half-second cousin to a half-second cousin twice removed to all the John W. Bush descendants, and about a third cousin once or twice removed to the descendants of John W.'s siblings. Third cousin and third cousin once removed would have been nicer results to have, but they're still within the realm of possibility. And we did a little follow-up. Tried to the parentage of Christina Chris, who was born about 1858 in Wyoming County, New York, just in case she introduced the Conley ancestry into her husband John Bush's line. Doesn't appear to be the case. She's actually, they were from France, although there's the German side of France, Alsace-Lorraine and that type of thing. So we had some thoughts. The trees assembled for the Bush and the Conley family don't appear to intersect. Bushes are German, and the Conleys claimed Irish origins. Couldn't find a spared John Brown, John Bush, John Conley, etc. in early census returns for New York. Nobody floating around. Kind of wondered, did John Brown use a Quebec origin story to explain away a bit of a German or Irish accent? Or did he just use Montreal as an excuse that it would be too far to travel to visit his relatives if the subject ever came up with his wife? The Bush centimorgan proportions work out reasonably well. If John Bush, 1855, was the father of Samuel Collier Brown, along with Elizabeth Collier, with both John Brown and John Bush being molders, did John Bush go looking for work in that capacity in Ontario on a regular basis? Was he up there long enough to start a family and every once in a while zip back to the States? John Bush was not married till 1885, so in Buffalo, so he was available certainly for several of the first children anyways. But since one of Samuel's siblings also has Bush and Conley shared matches, he would have to be the father, at least the both of them, and probably all of the children. But remember, he disappears from the Brown family in 1891. So maybe he gave up trying to juggle, if that's the situation. Another possibility is, did John Bush Sr., 1819, connect with an unknown daughter of Arthur Conley to create John Brown in 1855? Senator Morgan's amounts do not support this scenario very well. Nancy should be about one generation up from this. For example, if Arthur Conley himself and an unknown Bush daughter or a sister of John were the parents of John Brown. A very slim possibility is, did James Conley, 1833, have a wife or friend before Eliza, who was a Bush, and give a birth to a son, John? And more thoughts. One second cousin of Nancy's is tested in Ancestry, and as I've mentioned before, does match a few Bush and Conley descendants, so it's not just Nancy's line. Results from other DNA companies are going to have to be searched to locate additional potential Brown, Bush, and Conley relatives. And with the several of the other companies, we'll be able to identify the actual chromosome position. Ancestry does not give that, but a couple of the other companies do. Excuse me. And hopefully, if Nancy can get more Brown Collier second cousins to be tested, they can see if they have the Bush and Conley matches as well, which would help lock everything in. And so, in conclusion, it's still a brick wall.
And that's exactly how I feel.
Bang your head against it.
Definitely. I have to thank Steve for all the hours he's put in on this, assembling those Bush and Conley trees. Incredible work. Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, I wish I could hang up the charts here to show you the charts. If it had been live, I have big charts all made up showing a lot of this too, because I work better with paper.
Yes, yes. Well, I've seen the charts and they're very extensive. Anyway, again, I say thank you for all your work. It has, at least to me, proven my hypothesis that the guy was a liar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now, if anybody else has ideas how the Conleys and Bushes fit into your tree, please share them, because that is our stopping point right there. If we just had Bushes, we could have this thing solved. But
except I don't have any German ethnicity showing up. It's really strange.
Picky.
Yes, I know. So in the chat, I've got one gal saying that the Irish name is pronounced Siobhan, with somebody else coming in and saying Siobhan in Irish Gaelic is spelled a different way.
It definitely, that was my first inclination, that it should have been an N, but it's definitely an H at the end. But thank you. My guess is the H is supposed to be an N as well. But they did, her nickname, or in one of the land records, was actually Shibby. So we did know this. We had the start of it right, just not the end of it.
Yeah. And then, unfortunately, we didn't specify what ATDNA meant, and
well, I kept saying autosomal DNA, but yes, sorry about that. I should have clarified that.
But Ken McKinley defined it for her, so that was good. Thank you, Ken.
Perfect. Okay.
And Bob Bell said, "Wow, great research and ideas." Donna says, "Thank you, Stephen." Jim is saying, sometimes individuals living in Canada East change their names to an English version. My aunt's family changed from Gagne to Gaynor when the family moved to upstate New York. Did Bush become Brown?
And not
interesting theory.
Not past the 1900s anyways. In 1900 census, they're still Bushes.
Okay.
So they're, as far as we can tell, no, there wasn't that. We also did check Quebec records for Brun and things like that in case it was a French name. but no luck there either.
Yeah, yeah. Janice says, I want to thank Steve for the work he did for me.
No problem.
Sally, this was a great presentation. Thank you. Debbie is saying, thanks for your hours of work, Steve. We always learn a lot from you. Jim, excellent presentation. Marlene, check the Durham collection for the Quebec connection. Was that the collection you checked in Ancestry?
I believe that's the name of the one on Ancestry, I think.
Yeah, the
Or was it-
Durham.
I think it's
Okay.
either that or the other one. There's, I think, two of them with it.
Yeah.
Whichever one's on
Laurie-
Ancestry.
Yeah. Laurie is saying, I'm a descendant of Conley's My Brick Walls. I'm going to check in my DNA for Bushes Browns. My Conley is from Madoc. So
Okay.
that's interesting.
Yeah, a little further away, but as you say, check for those surnames and also even, well, yeah, the Brown would cover you, wouldn't it? So yes.
Yes. I think I'm in Ancestry as Nancy Brown Trimble. And then we've got Allison Brown, my sister, and Susan Brown McLennan, my other sister. So if you end up matching any of those three, I'd be really happy to hear from you. Michael, fascinating work. Donna. Nancy, I have one question regarding something you mentioned about the best of genealogy by question mark regarding elusive and poor ancestors. Okay, that is Elizabeth Schoen Mills. She is American, and she is the absolute guru of the fan principle, one of the authors of the genealogical proof standard. She was a president of the board for certifications of genealogists. Among many other things, she was a professor and lecturer in history and sociology, and she announced her retirement last year, but Family Tree Webinars managed to get her come out from retirement to do these monthly webinars that they are calling the best of Elizabeth Schoen Mills.
And they're not lying either.
No,
She is wonderful.
she and Thomas Jones are the absolute gurus for genealogy. If you get a chance to listen to either one of them, do so. So Cher says, did you check Durham? Actually, I did check Durham very many years ago for Browns, but Steve did it for variations this time around. Okay, Jim says, have you tried Watto analysis on DNA Painter? I have not yet. It will be in some of my next steps. If the Browns were Irish, this is Paulette, if Browns were Irish and Gaelic speakers, you might want to look for De Brun or De Bruin.
Okay.
Interesting.
Yeah. Well, mark that down.
And Donna said, thank you. I guess that was for the Elizabeth Schoen Mills name. And that's the end of our meeting chat. So, Steve, any last words?
No, just all I can do is follow down every clue that you can. Check different companies because different indexers read things differently, obviously. And don't hesitate to dive into land records and wills and things like that, because you're going to get a lot of support out of them. And quite often wills are filed with land records if they had no other worldly goods to give away other than mostly the farmland that they were working with. So it's most of them are quite easy to work with. I mean, I was working with those New York records, just boom, right off the bat, because everything is laid out by county and it's really easy to search. And Family Search has a lot of land records for Ontario, as well as various states. So you can see them for free as long as you're signed up. Or the odd time you might have to go to a family history center or whatever they call it now, a family search center.
Yes.
And something like that. But they're available, and they're a lot easier to access now than they ever used to be. So there's lots of records out there to try and break down those brick walls.
Okay. And I just popped the name of the second genealogy guru in the chat, Thomas Jones. Okay. So at this point, Steve, if you'll close your share, I'll open mine up again. And okay, I think I'm up and showing again.
Yep, no problem.
Okay. So our next meeting is the DNA Special Interest Group. It's on April 19th. And if you wish to join, please send me an email, either to my personal email or my chair email on the slide. And I can add you to our group and send you the link. Our Zoom social time is the fourth Thursday of each month, so that's going to be April 27th. We're trying to overcome the limitations that Zoom puts on us, because it really doesn't replace the coffee time, does it? So the link to join up for our virtual drop-in is on the front page of our website. And if you click that link, you're actually signing up for January through June of this year. So we've got a couple more meetings. So please consider joining us. We have a great time. The research room is open the second and the third Fridays, 10 to 1. We ask that you contact Steve Wood to make sure that we are going to be there. Fridays are the days that the small parking lot is more empty. And even if you can't make Fridays, don't be afraid to contact Steve at the Durham Research handle there to make alternate arrangements, and we will try and accommodate your request. Also, don't be afraid to send in other brick wall problems to Steve, and you can see how very competent he is at the research side of things. Next month, 2nd of May, we have Larry Doble. He's going to talk about Old Brock Township. He is the chairman of the Sunderland and District Historical Society for the last 20 years. His ancestors came to Brock Township from Ireland in 1822, and the Doble family has been there for 7 generations. He's going to describe the history behind the creation of Brock Township and the wars, battles, and events which determined who settled there. So looking forward to that. Here's a few more, 2 more confirmed speakers. Janice Nickerson in June for proven strategies for overcoming research obstacles. September, I'm waiting for my chosen speaker to confirm. And October, we've got Glenn Wright. He was with us a couple of years ago, and he's doing Proudly She Served, Canadian Women at War, 1885 to 1945. And the reason I chose October, because I found out that October in Canada is Women's History Month. So I think that's an appropriate topic. If you find what we're doing and what speakers we bring in are valuable, we invite you to go to our donation button. It's on the left side of our website homepage, and make a donation to our branch funds. We use the Canada Helps website you will receive an income tax automatically by email, and that money is used to fund our speakers and our library. So it would be greatly appreciated. So here's a couple of questions that we can use in our chat time. We've got about another 10 or 15 minutes. And I'm just going to stop sharing, and hopefully I can figure out how to do this. And that is see if I can open up everybody's microphones, but that is not there.
Probably best let us open them ourselves when you want to speak, then you won't get background noise.
Okay. Thank you very much, Bob. And you just proved that it can be done. So if anybody wants to comment on the fact that there's quite a bit of emphasis, and I'm talking a lot about Roots Tech and other places I've been, they seem to be really into the storytelling side of your family history. And just looking for opinions. Would you think this is a good thing, a bad thing, something that detracts from your research, something that adds to your research? So in your control panel, you should have a reactions button, and one of the things is to hold up your hand. And if, okay, there's share. Go ahead and open and let's talk, share.
Okie dokie. Storytelling in your family history is, I think, one of the easiest ways to present your family story to others. This is what I did when I did my mom's research for her. And if you can, way back in the 1500s and 1600s, you don't have photographs available for people. And so storytelling such as this is the church they attended and this is the churchyard where they are buried. And so you tell little stories like that. Storytelling doesn't have to be a long, involved story. It can just be something 2 or 3 sentences long about various aspects of their lives. And I think it's a good way to tell your family story.
Okay. Well, thank you, Cher. Is there anybody else who'd like to jump in on that one? Steve.
I think I'll add to what Cher says. It's a great way to preserve the memories too. I mean, even just the little articles that I put into our local Kindred Spirits magazine for the branch, those stories are hopefully now preserved for, I'll say eternity, but that might be a little long. But there's some of them are stories that people won't have ever heard unless I had them in writing. And so if you can put things down in writing, and especially getting them published into even just a small newsletter like ours, it will make sure that they last longer than you do. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, longer than we do definitely is a worthwhile goal. If you're like me and you're worried who's going to take on the task, I don't think there's very many people holding up their hand. So Coral is next, please.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing Steve said. If you don't share the stories, they're gone. I'm the one in my family with the stories, and they will go with me if I don't record them.
Very good.
So then no one can pick up like those stories. Like if someone 2 generations now get into genealogy, those stories are lost if we don't record them somewhere.
Yep. Okay, Bob.
Yes, I think having the names is important, but having the meat to the stories, that makes it interesting. I think it'll also make your research more likely to be preserved. If it's just a list of names, some people might be interested, but I think more people are interested, and even historians, for the social history that comes with these little stories. And often the stories tell you more about things than you realize. They tell you about the times, social conditions. And so I think it's very important to include stories if you have them.
Thank you, Bob. Share.
Okay. How do I put up my hand?
Oh, okay, Barb.
You know, I mentioned to you before that I think I mentioned I signed up for the overnight workshop with Lynn Palermo next September, and that's on doing stories. But she's presenting on the 12th, I think it is, how to something about publishing, because I want to know how to make my book uniform. Like, where should I put maps? Where should I put charts? How do I make it? I just want to write about ancestors I find interesting and put the rest on charts, and put a little chart for that specific ancestor. You know, I want to know how to lay out the book. And she's doing a presentation kind of about that on the 12th, 7 p.m., how to make your family history book. I think it's in someone else from Heirloom Family History Books is involved. I didn't know about that company. So Lynn Palermo.
So would we find information on her website?
Right, because I was trying to, I just looked now I didn't know if it was OGS or who, but I think it's directly from Lynn. So if you go to her website.
Yeah, she's the armchair genealogist?
Yes, and so she'll give you the link.
Okay.
It's free, I think, you know.
Okay.
7 p.m. on the 12th, Wednesday.
Okay, Cher's got her hand up now.
Where's the hand thing?
You're muted.
I just wanted to, I thought of an example of a story, because I had nothing to tell about these people other than their birth, marriage, death, and that gets kind of boring generation after generation. So what I did when I knew where they lived and I knew where the church was and things like that, I followed the roads along, sometimes with Google, the Google thing where you put the little man down, let them walk along the road,
Yeah,
you know?
Google map, the pictures on Google Maps.
Yeah, and I would find things like old Roman bridges, things like that. And so in my family story, I would say, this is the way they came to church each day. And I put a little map in. This is the way they went to church. And just about here, and I mark it with a little X, is where the old Roman bridge is. And they would cross that every Sabbath day and things like that. And things that there's no way, I mean, maybe they walked through the water and didn't cross the bridge. I don't know, but that was my story and I'm sticking to it, that they crossed that bridge on the way to church or on their way to market or whatever it was I happened to be researching. And it's just little things that have never been passed down in a family and never would be, but it makes birth, marriage, death lists a heck of a lot more interesting if you can do things like that.
Okay, and Edward is the next person. You'll have to unmute yourself.
There we go. As an analogy, the Bible is full of stories, but how many remember all the begats that were written there as well? I think it's the stories that have kept that book in front of us for a long time, and I think that's what will encourage the next generation to become interested.
Yes, totally agree with that. I've got a comment in the chat. BD said Roots Tech, Krista Cowan, the ancestry genealogist, had a great video, and I saw it, so it is good. A great video teaching you to compose brief, catchy stories to interest family members in your research, and he put the link in the chat. So check that out. That's a good spot. And oh, Bob is being quite irreverent here. He says, Cher, if they were really good people, they would walk on the water, not through it. Thanks, Bob, for the comic relief. Now we'll go to Jim, if you could unmute.
Yeah,
Jim Bowen.
I think one thing, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I think with one thing with stories I've had to sometimes write two versions. The version that doesn't upset people when they read it, and then the version of the truth. I think that's really sort of important, especially when you, I'm thinking about my wife's Bernardo mother who came to Canada, came to Blackstock, and the story of her actually leaving the day before her mother could actually come and see her from Liverpool. I had to take that portion out when I was providing it to an 80-year-old relative about the sort of the sad thing. So just always keep in mind who's reading it and for what reason, and then you may have to have two versions of what you do.
A very good point, Jim. Thank you. Okay. Is there anybody else who would like to ring in on this? Well, I have to admit, my biggest regret. As a teenager, I sat down with my grandmother, and all I asked for was names and dates. She'd start to tell stories, and I'd cut her off. And it is my biggest regret. And I've got another hand up, Barbara Campbell, if you could unmute.
Hi there. I couldn't get my video working right now, but I'd love to say something. Thanks for your presentation. I'm out in Victoria, BC, and really glad to hear all what you're doing and the brick walls. I've prepared a few kind of magazine-length booklets of family history for my family, and one of them has sort of a 2-page spread on each of the relatives, you know, just about a dozen people leading back to the second great grandparent level, and with pictures as best I can. And I found that it was great. It did interest my family. People of different ages would have a look and flip through and start asking questions and this sort of thing, whereas I don't think any of them would have taken the time to read a whole book if I spent the time writing one. So.
Okay, that's a good comment. Okay, my second question is, has anybody made a genealogical discovery or a website or something like that that you think everybody else would like to hear about? And you can either put it the website or in the chat, or you can click leave and thank you for coming. Share. Unmute.
I got to unmute. There we go. For the past couple of years, I've belonged to a group through the Toronto Cornish Association called the Cornish Research Group. And we've been discovering ways to trace your Cornish ancestry, all different kinds of things that are on the internet. And it's just wonderful what's out there, really. And one of your families, Stephen, was Cornish and part from, can't remember the name of the parish now. But if anyone does have Cornish ancestry, go to the online parish clerks database. It's free. Years ago, 15, 20 years ago, Cornwall online parish clerks were the very first online parish clerks. And people would take on the responsibility of looking up for a particular parish for anyone who needed information. And finally, they pooled their information, and every parish in Cornwall and every record they've been able to get their hands on has been put into this database. And it is very, very full. So if you're researching Cornish people, and it's totally free, go to the Cornwall Online Parish Clerks database, and birth, marriage, death, wills, all kinds of stuff. It's great.
So
and it's free. No paying on Find My Past.
So Cornwall Online Parish
Clerk database. Yeah.
Database. And presumably if you Google that, then you'll find it.
And it's wonderful. Everything you ever wanted to know about Cornish folk is on there. And
Okay.
it certainly has helped me trace my people. And what I did, I printed off a parish map, a Cornwall parish map. And every time I find somebody in the database, I put a red dot in that parish. And it's so wonderful to see the migration of the families. And they're all in there. They got them all.
Oh,
I go right back to the beginning of parish registers.
perfect. Thank you, Cher. Okay, so just a quick thing, how to save the chat.
Can you see Dan's hand up? Dan's hand is up.
Oh, yes, it is.
And Bob's was up as well, but he's
And
taking.
Barb Garrow, and just a minute. I'm going to just, if everybody will click on the participants button at the very bottom where you would normally type your message, there should be either a more button or 3 dots. You click on that. And then there is a way to save the chat with all the links and everything that we have had put in there today. So at this point, Dan, I'll call on Dan.
I just wanted to go back to the story theme because we went to the hospice in Peterborough yesterday, I guess late afternoon, because a cousin I grew up with was there. But when we went, I didn't know what to expect in a hospice, but when we went, there were my cousins, his sisters were there, and I hadn't seen them for 10 years, but we had a wonderful time. Well, and their husbands too, just chatting, telling stories. But I'm afraid they're going to be lost. It's just that he didn't want any funeral arrangements made, and he died this morning. So, just sad to see that all those great stories that we had. I didn't realize we'd be having such a good time telling all these stories while he's laying in the bed, taking his last breath. But we talked about him and about our growing up as children, and it was quite wonderful. But they're going to be lost.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
That's the danger.
Yeah.
Barbara Garrow, you're next. You have to unmute.
Is it unmuted now? Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Okay, so it's a discovery, and I can't tell you the exact sequence, but it was something to do with Roots Tech. But someone, I looked up the name William Tunkey, who is an ancestor of mine who lived in Whitchurch, somewhere around in farmland around there in the 1800s. And on the censuses, it said he was born in Lower Canada and was French. But I thought Tunkey, like what kind of a French name is that? And so I was trying to think, what might it be? And I thought, okay, maybe Tanguay or something like that. And on the Roots Tech, where they had the family trees, and I think it's on Family Search. I think it's still there when you look for your relatives on Roots Tech. You can just go straight to Family Search now and do it. I'm not totally clear. Anyway, somebody had posted a document, and it was a document about the War of 1812, an application for land. And it said on it that Guillaume Tanguay from Lower Canada was asking for land because he had been a mariner or something during the War of 1812. He wanted to marry a woman from Upper Canada. So he wanted to move like permanently to Upper Canada. And it was signed with both names on it, Guillaume Tanguay and William Tunkey. And I think, like, how much better can you do to get the two names together, right?
Oh,
that was my find of the last.
That's a gold mine.
My find of the last month.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
Trish, your hand is up.
Just two very quick ones. First of all, to get a copy of the chat, it has to be in Windows. I have an Apple, computer, and they don't take that. It doesn't take that. So it's just for, to my understanding, it's just Windows that can print that off. So
Okay, I have to disagree. I have a MacBook and mine works fine.
okay, I was just
Or is it an iPad?
yeah, well, no, mine's not an iPad. Mine's an Apple, whatever. Anyway, but the extension is TXT. And so that's why I was quite sure that you couldn't get it on Apple. But anyway, that's beside the point. The only other thing I was wanting to say is that when I heard one time, and I think it's very appropriate, that if when somebody dies, a whole archive dies with them. So see if you,
Yes, so true.
yeah. So if you can get any kind of stories written down, whether they're totally exact or not, it'd be a good idea to do so. So anyway, tis good. This was a wonderful presentation today. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for coming. And I think we'll wrap it up now because we're pretty close to the 2-hour limit that our meetings are booked for. And I want to express my gratitude for all the comments. Thank you for staying on for the chat part. Partially makes up for the lost social time. And next month will be a hybrid meeting. I have booked the room at the Northminster Church for in-person because I'm pretty sure May will be not snowy. So thank you very much. I'm going to end the session now and hope to see you next month.